Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. This webinar is being presented by the Clean Energy States Alliance, and our topic for our webinar today is NYSERDA's State Energy Financing Fund and DOE's Loan Programs Office financing clean energy at the state level. And thanks especially to the people who registered for this webinar back when it was supposed to take place in October. We rescheduled it due to concerns about a government shutdown, but we're ultimately, we're here and we're very happy to be here. So thanks for being here too. A few quick logistics to go over before we get started. All of our attendees are in listen only mode. You can join in via telephone or computer audio. If you'd like to minimize the webinar control panel, you can click on the orange arrow that you see circled here. And you can also click on that orange arrow to expand the webinar control panel. One thing you might like to do with that is to type in your questions and your comments. We will get to as many questions as we can during the Q&A portion at the end. And we have a lot of people registered, which is great. We will try to get to as many questions as we can. Type your questions in when you think of them. Don't necessarily wait until the very end to type those in. A final note, we are recording today's webinar and we will post a PDF of the slides as well as the webinar recording. We'll send those out to you via email and put them on our website, cesa.org/webinars. That is a great URL to know because it is where all of our upcoming and archived webinars live. So with that, I'm very pleased to pass it over to my colleague, Sam Schacht. Sam is a project manager here at the Clean Energy States Alliance, and he is going to kick us off.
Yes, thank you very much, Sam, and a warm welcome today to everyone who's joining this webinar. State Energy Financing Fund and DOE's Loan Programs Office financing clean energy at the state level. We're really excited to have several distinguished guests from NYSERDA and the Department of Energy Loan Programs Office to share information about New York State's new State Energy Financing Fund and how other states can take advantage of LPO's expanded Title 17 Clean Energy Financing Authority. Before we begin, I want to give a brief introduction to the Clean Energy States Alliance, or as we call ourselves, CESA. CESA is a national nonprofit coalition of public agencies and organizations, mostly state energy offices, working to advance clean energy around the country. Our members represent 18 states plus the District of Columbia. And if you'd like to learn more about what we do and why it matters, you can watch a video that I will include a link to in the chat a little bit later. Today, we're going to hear from a really fantastic panel of experts working on unlocking federal loan money for decarbonization projects around the country. I'll briefly set the background for them before we begin. And even before we do that, as this slide here shows you, one of CESA's big newer projects is our IRA and BIL implementation projects, where we work with both our member states and non-member states to help them navigate these two really groundbreaking laws, navigate the funding opportunities that are available to them, and provide them with lots of information, guidance, and analysis to help them do the best job that they can in taking advantage of federal funding for clean energy. And one of those things, and perhaps maybe a little bit less known thing, is LPO's Title 17 Clean Energy Financing Program. LPO can finance projects in the United States that support clean energy deployment and energy infrastructure reinvestment to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and air pollution. Title 17 was created by the Energy Policy Act of 2005 and has since been amended, most recently by the Infrastructure and Investment and Jobs Act, otherwise known as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law of 2021, and the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022 to give LPO expanded authority. Title 17 financing can now include certain projects supported by state energy financing institutions, or CEFIs. That's what you're going to hear a lot today about CEFIs. Most importantly, CEFI-supported projects do not need to demonstrate an innovative energy technology. Projects using established clean energy technologies like wind and solar are eligible for LPO financing if they receive support from a CEFI. We will learn more about what qualifies as a CEFI and what kind of support that they can give clean energy projects later in the webinar. New York is the first state to take advantage of LPO's SEFI program. In early September, NYSERDA launched the $20 million State Energy Financing Fund, a first of its kind financing program to help lenders and project developers unlock LPO's Title 17 Clean Energy Financing Authority. We hope that NYSERDA's program will be the first of many state programs that will unlock billions of dollars for clean energy projects across the nation. Joining us today from NYSERDA are Greg Hale, Senior Advisor for Energy Efficiency Markets and Finance, Luis Aguirre-Torres, Director of Financial Planning and Analysis and Financing Solutions, and John Joshi, Director of Financing Solutions, will join us for the Q&A at the end. On the LPO side, we have Elizabeth Bellis-Wolfe, Senior Advisor, and Hans Riemer, Senior Consultant. We will include the bios for our panelists in the chat where you can read them at your own convenience. And right now, I would love to hand it over to Elizabeth and Hans, who will give us an overview of the SEFI track of LPO's Title 17 program and explain how NYSERDA and LPO are working together. So take it away, Elizabeth and Hans.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Thank you to the Clean Energy States Alliance for having us today, and attendees, thank you for joining us. I'm Elizabeth Bellis-Wolfe, Senior Consultant and SEFI Transaction Lead with the Loan Programs Office at the U.S. Department of Energy, here with my colleague, Hans Riemer, Senior Consultant and State and Local Outreach Lead with the Loan Programs Office at the U.S. Department of Energy. We're so pleased that so many of you are able to join us today. It looks like almost 200 already and steadily increasing. Let's go ahead to the next slide and just quickly preview for you more generally what LPO is doing.
We're working on that.
Thanks, Hans.
Okay.
All right, this is what we call our monthly activity report from September. As you can see, LPO is very busy these days with over 200 proposed projects in the pipeline as of the end of September, likely even more when we get our updated numbers for October shortly. And that number does include a handful of SEFI supported applications. Next slide.
So LPO is the finance arm. We're like a bank, but we're not a bank that, we're a different kind of lending authority. We want to work with our applicant and we want our projects to succeed. And we're here as patient capital, as committed partners. And for example, you can work with us on your application materials. We are here for you to help provide feedback for your projects, to share timelines, to work with you. Unlike a lot of application programs for grants where there's a little bit of a wall there, with LPO, we're here to engage with you in an iterative process and help you put forward the best project that you could design. We have multiple finance authorities, so today we're focusing on the State Energy Financing Institution Loan Authority, but we have an innovative loan authority where actually offshore wind, pretty much all projects would qualify, and things that you're familiar with LPO financing are generally have been under that program. We also have a tribal loan authority. If you have tribal governments, we'd love to talk to them about supporting their energy projects. We have a program just for manufacturing facilities, battery plants, car plants, other types of clean energy manufacturing facilities. We have a separate loan fund. But today we're going to talk about the new authority we have to lend to projects that are supported by state energy financing institutions. Elizabeth.
Thank you. As Hans noted, we've got this new SEFI program we're really excited about. I think the big takeaway here is that SEFI projects are not required to employ innovative technology. This has been a real barrier for a lot of projects that states want to support that may involve fully commercialized or more traditional projects. So today we'll be taking a deeper dive into the SEFI program specifically, noting, of course, that states may also have great interest in some of our other programs for other types of projects that they support. Next slide.
All right. So first, I'm going to ask Sam to post a link into the chat, and you can click on that. It's a link to our new toolkit, and the The toolkit shares some, although not all, of the CEFIs that have been determined to be CEFIs, as well as some background information. The big picture I'd like to share is that most states would have multiple entities that would qualify as a CEFI. You know, a CEFI is a public or quasi-public entity that finances energy projects, and that, I think the instinctive thing is to believe that that must be the green bank, or if you don't have a green bank, maybe you don't have a CEFI. But actually, energy offices, you know, competitiveness funds, housing agencies, economic development authorities. There's many types of entities in a state, and a state could have multiple entities potentially that could qualify. So the thing to do is to just think about all the different places in your state government where energy projects have been supported, and then if you want to support projects through that entity, we can work on you to determine whether that is indeed a CEFI. On the screen, you'll see an exemplary list of some of the early CEFIs we've determined. It's not exclusive of all of them that we've determined, but shows you kind of a range of different types of state agencies, authorities that are known to be CEFIs. So we just determine that. We kind of take the documentation about the entity, and our lawyers review it, and then we're able to, you know, confirm that indeed this entity a state would like to work through is indeed a CEFI. All right, project category, Elizabeth.
Thanks, Juan. As you've heard, this is an IRA authorization. There are many different types of support that can constitute meaningful financial support or credit enhancements within the meaning of the legislation and our implementation of it. Grants, equity, loan loss reserve, subordinate debt, pari passu senior loans. You know, we haven't just started to scratch the surface of all the different and creative ways that states are supporting these types of projects. We're going to evaluate the meaningfulness of that CEFI support on a case-by-case basis, but we are in the final stages now of finalizing some further guidance that we hope will provide you some useful examples and factors that we're going to use. So please stay posted for that. But the real takeaway, right, is this allows us to finance projects we couldn't otherwise. Next slide. Like all LPO projects, CEFI projects have to reduce GHG emissions, have a reasonable prospect of repayment as assessed by our rigorous due diligence, and they have to employ at least one of 13 eligible technologies. Again, projects do not have to use an innovative technology. As you can see from this list, the universe of eligible technologies is quite broad. It includes renewable energy systems, efficient end use, and energy storage technologies. Next slide.
Okay, so very high level here. If you are a project developer, if you're in the private sector and you're wondering, how can I gain access to LPO financing? I have a project that is a clean energy project, but it is not innovative. You can talk to state agencies, find out, you find a nexus between your project and state agencies. And if there is a state that wants to support your project in order for you to deploy in the state, we can work with that state agency to ascertain whether that's a CEFI. So if there's a conversation that a project developer can and have at the state level, and we can all convene around whether that is, what the possibilities there. For state officials, we suggest that you look through your budget and identify, how do we finance energy projects that reduce emissions? Of course, that's a broad category. Projects that are reducing emissions may be funded out of a variety of different agencies or authorities in the state. So think about where that is happening or where you would like to have it happen in your partnership to support projects that apply to us, and then we can work with you to, again, determine what the entity, if it indeed qualifies as a SEFI. That link that's in the that goes to our toolkit describes some of the criteria that we use to determine whether an entity is a SEFI. So that's how you proceed. All right, so going to talk high level here about the first kind of major approach for a SEFI to support an energy project. The first is basically providing an award to a project that applies to us. So I always say when I'm engaging with states, think about who's the applicant here. Is the applicant a company or is the applicant a state, government agency? I think a lot of times the assumption is, oh, this is an opportunity for the state government or an agency to borrow, and that's an opportunity that we will address momentarily. But there's a significant order of business here where it's a company that is applying to us that you are supporting in order to ensure that that company is deploying at scale in your state. So you can do that on an individual project basis. You might have an EV company that wants to do a big project in your state, and so you provide a grant or make an investment in that project that we agree qualifies as meaningful support, and then that project can apply to us. So that is the funding award. That's sort of the one-off deal mindset in a sense. Or you can do a funding program. Many states have funding programs. You put out a notice for a grant. It's a way of soliciting projects to come to you. So with the funding program approach, you're basically RFPing the private sector to find out what kind of projects want to deploy in your state, and you're making funding available to them that we have a dialogue about how that support needs to be calibrated so that it would qualify as meaningful support and allow those projects to apply to us. So you could set aside an amount of funding that you want to devote to awards. Projects use that funding as SEFI support, and they apply to us, and then they deploy in your state. And you can do that as your, this is what NYSERDA is doing, and we're going to get a deep dive there in a moment. But big picture here, that is one way to find out, that's one way to back multiple projects in your state. There are many advantages to doing this. Now, if you were to proceed on this path, you might want to RFI the private sector first to find out what the levels of interest are. But the big picture here is it allows you to RFP the private sector and to identify project concepts that meet your goals. It also allows you to attract national projects to your state. States generally have a requirement that their taxpayer dollars can only be used to benefit the state's taxpayers. But in a project deal like this, we're often talking about multiples of that state's dollar being expended here. So you could say that 20 times the amount of money that we invest in a project must be spent in the project. Now, there's a company that has a $500 million project. They could come to your state, deploy 20 times your award there, qualify for LPO. You get a new project in your state, and the company is able to deploy in multiple states as well. So that's how you can sort of land projects in your state by using this authority. We can also send projects to you. So if you have a funding program, we have companies that approach us. They might need SEFI authority. If you publish that information about your funding program, those companies can go find you to deploy in your state. In fact, we'll publish that information on our website if you'd like us to as well. So there is a universe of projects that are out there. If a state creates a funding program that is public, those projects can find you, and you can get multiples of your state investment deploying in the state and land national projects there as a result. Elizabeth.
Thanks, Tom. There are a number of additional considerations working with the Loan Programs Office that may be particularly salient for SEFI projects. For example, a project can't benefit directly or indirectly from most other forms of federal support, excluding otherwise allowable federal income tax benefits. Hans, I am only seeing the prior slide. I don't know if mine is.
You're not seeing.
There
okay.
we go. Now it's moved on. Thank you. In addition to the federal support questions, the LPO supported debt can constitute no more than 80% of the total project costs, and often less than that. That means the project sponsor, whoever's coming forward and serving as the borrower and putting funds in, they really have to have a very considerable amount of additional funding beyond just the LPO supported debt to cover those more subordinated portions of the capital stack, in addition to costs of advisors, which have to be paid during due diligence before the loan can be closed and drawn upon to reimburse the sponsor for some of those costs. The federal requirements that apply to all LPO-supported projects should be taken into account in planning and structuring a SEFI project. For example, a SEFI that wishes to apply directly to LPO as a borrower must consider whether it is comfortable standing behind its underlying project participants with respect to weekly payment of prevailing wages for any construction involved in the project. In addition, Build America, Buy America requires recipients that are not for-profit entities, so that likely covers many SEFI borrowers, to use domestic materials unless they receive a waiver from the Secretary of Energy due to inavailability of domestic materials or a significant price premium. That requirement may not apply so strictly to non-public applicants to our program. And finally, the various transaction costs involved in LPO-supported projects result in most borrowers determining that LPO support only pencils for larger projects in excess of around $100 million. And that might be a very large project for many SEFIs or for any company to achieve within a single state. That's one reason why we're seeing some interesting approaches to multi-state SEFI support to help ensure sufficient scale to work with LPO.
All right, I'm going to go back a slide because I think I got the order jumbled here. So we've talked a little bit about the funding award strategy. However, there is another approach, which is that the SEFI or the state would create a special project vehicle and then be the borrower. So if you have projects in your state that are more than $100 million, providing an award to that project that's meaningful could potentially allow that project to borrow from us. If you have a lot of projects that are smaller than $100 million, you might want to be able to access our capital in order to lend to them. So you can also do that. And what we need in that case, you're the applicant, so now you follow the applicant rules. You have to have 20+% of your project as equity and subordinated debt. So if you are the SEFI making an award, the amount of money you might need to put in is much smaller relative to if you want to be the borrower, you're coming to the table with 20–25% of the cost of what you want to do in hand as equity and subordinated debt. Having said that, there is a very good opportunity here for you to devise a pipeline of projects that you want to support in the sectors we'll get to, and then be the borrower. But it comes with a lot of requirements as well. So there's an intense level of effort required there. But there are definitely states for this is the match. This is how they want to utilize our financing. And so we're here for that. All right, back to where we were. Elizabeth mentioned some of the critical financing considerations here, but our rates are generally Treasury plus 3/8. So if it's a 10-year loan, look at the 10-year Treasury, add 3/8. And then for some projects, there's an additional risk premium. And for virtual power plants and 1706 projects, there's not. So, you'll come talk to us about how you're going to qualify, but you can generally start to think about it from Treasury plus 3/8. There are considerable costs in the process, as Elizabeth mentioned. That's why generally it's 100 million and up is where we really start to pencil out, and lots of other important details that we will get to when we're working together. All right. Okay, I'm going to just whip through some potential projects so we can have time for our colleagues here, but just to kind of tease your minds and get you focused, and then just to wrap up, please reach out to Elizabeth and I, and we will work through, provide feedback, and do an iterative process. But LPO is working intensively on virtual power plant models, and we would love to support your state implementing a virtual power plant or multiple virtual power plant projects. There are different ways you can achieve that. You could bring a national company to your state. You may have seen LPO recently awarded a $3 billion conditional commitment to Sonova for a project called Hestia, which is a residential solar storage virtual power plant project. You can bring those kinds of companies to your state by being the CEFI qualifier if they need CEFI in order to qualify. So you could take that approach to virtual power plants. You could, through your green bank or a similar type of lending institution, provide low-cost financing directly to consumers who then are able to replace appliances that can be aggregated into virtual power plants. Or you could work with your utility and implement a non-bill financing strategy. And the utility can use our financing to reduce rates and reach more customers, particularly lower income customers. So there's many models that we would be delighted to explore with you. Affordable housing, affordable housing providers can create energy projects, virtual power plant projects, and use our financing to support them. The housing agencies, potentially a CEFI, and can help those projects qualify. You could also use potentially a ESCO model to do energy retrofits into portfolios of projects. Higher education, many higher education campuses use district energy systems, and a lot of schools are thinking about how to decarbonize. We can potentially support those kinds of projects as well as downtown systems. Fleets, how is your state think? Most states are thinking about how to decarbonize the transportation sector. We can be here to support loans. You could be the borrower to lend out to businesses that want to upgrade their fleets, or you could provide a CEFI award to a company that is providing EVs as a service to your state government and your local governments. Charging infrastructure, lots of possibilities there. Industrial decarb. Are you working with your private sector to make investments in reducing emissions from manufacturing sector, agricultural sector, all of them? Potentially your financing support to those projects might allow those projects to borrow from us. So, you're providing an economic development CEFI award, and then the company is able to come in and borrow 500 million or $1 billion or several billion from us to implement across their facilities. So, or you could be the borrower and lend to smaller projects. Community energy projects, renewable portfolios for disadvantaged communities. Lots of possibilities there. Government building decarbonization, commercial buildings. Can you create energy projects, virtual power plants, improving efficiency across the commercial building sector? We can be a resource for that. Elizabeth.
Thanks, Hans. So this was for all our more visual learners out here. An attempt we've made to try to put on paper a structure that has been proposed to us as a possible way to do some of these larger multi-state projects. Just to be super clear, this is a very preliminary draft. It's not a commitment of any kind by DOE or LPO to this particular structure. But what's shown here on this slide is a situation where US DOE, as usual, is providing its guarantee for a senior secured loan, either with the FSB or with a third-party lender. FSB, for everyone's recollection, is the federal financing bank that we can issue loans through, to a private company or borrower that owns the project assets. And that project company that is borrowing is receiving some form of meaningful support from a lead CEFI. That might be pari passu senior secured lending, like the CEFI might be a party to a loan agreement, or it could be a mezzanine finance agreement, or simply some other form of grant or other support that has been deemed to be meaningful by LPO. And then you can see up above, the CEFI is serving as sort of the main party in interest on the documents, but it is participating out to other CEFIs and potentially non-CEFIs some portion of the risk that it's taking on, allowing us to really hopefully expedite the process of getting to a commitment while allowing for greater breadth as the project goes on, and letting CEFIs perhaps join on with projects that have really shown they're working, and that just need additional funding to broaden their geographic scope. Next slide. Here's another one that we've been proposed to. Again, not a commitment, very much a rough draft of our attempt to describe what states have suggested to us. Here's where we have an asset owner that cannot pledge the actual asset or improvements or fixtures on that asset, often because of the terms of other financing. We see that, you know, there are often guarantors that simply won't let that kind of pledge happen. So instead, that borrower, that ultimate asset owner, works with an energy service company, an ESCO, enters into a performance contract for the installation and financing of the energy-related measures. And there's set up a SPV, a special purpose vehicle, that will own the right to receive the income or the payments on that performance contract, and also benefit from a guarantee from the ESCO, which typically has a good rating and balance sheet in order to provide more reasonable prospect of repayment for the project. And here, the meaningful support from the CEFI can come in to the sort of SPV. We're still working out the details of exactly how that will work. But I think this one's an interesting one given some of the challenges we have with layering financing. So I hope that's helpful, and we'd love to do this with all of your ideas as well. It's always fun to get started with whiteboarding and drawing out how we might work together. Hans?
Okay, well, I hope this has been helpful, and please reach out to us. We have a team in our state engagement program, in our CEFI program. We have many people here to work with you and help you design your projects. So thank you so much. Really appreciate the invitation to the Clean Energy States Alliance for bringing the community together today.
All right, thank you very much, Hans and Elizabeth. That was wonderful. And I see that there are some questions coming in the chat, which is fantastic. So keep those coming. And remember that if we don't get to all of them, we can still share them with the wonderful folks at LPO who might be able to answer them at a later date. And now we will turn to Greg Hale and Luis Aguirre-Torres to talk through NYSERDA's specific program to take advantage of Title 17 clean energy financing, the CEFI track. So Greg and Luis, take it away.
Thanks, Sam. And thanks to CISA for hosting this and helping us get the word out about what we're doing with our CEFI in New York State through NYSERDA. I'm going to just give some very brief background context, the policy environment that is evolving in New York State to drive the clean energy transition, with a particular focus on buildings, because that's where I'm coming from. But our PON, as Luis will tell you, is broad enough to cover most things in the built environment. So next slide, please. In 2019, New York State passed the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, or CLCPA. It's our climate act at the state level. very aggressive. It's legislatively enacted, so these targets aren't sort of loose goals. They are law that the state needs to meet. And the biggest ones are in 2050, an 85% reduction in statewide greenhouse gas emissions. The remaining 15% can come from offsets, but the idea is to have a 100% net carbon neutral economy by 2050. On the way there is a 40% target on emissions in 2030. And then there are a bunch of sub goals, a very important one of which is that by the end of 2040, we are mandated to get to 100% emissions-free electrical grid in the state, with a target on the way there of 70% renewable energy by 2030. And this is, of course, really important because it makes electrification a decarbonization tool. Another really important element of the CLCPA is a requirement that at least 35% of the benefits of this clean energy transition flow to disadvantaged communities, and the target in the law is set at 40%. So everything we're doing these days has a very strong, as we call it, DAC focus. The CLCPA set up a climate action council, which is a 22-member body that developed over the course of 2 years a very detailed plan of how we can meet these aggressive targets, and that's called the scoping plan. And I'll touch on that in a minute. I just want to put some of the regulatory drivers out there to show how much demand we think we are going to be able to generate in this sector. Next slide. So at the same time, New York City passed its Climate Act, which was called the Climate Mobilization Act. And the buildings-oriented leg of that was Local Law 97, which is a building performance mandate, but it's done through emissions. So there's an emissions budget that every building will have. And if you are emitting more than your budget, then you're going to get fined. That budget decreases every 5 years. So the first compliance period is actually next year. And then the next compliance period will be 2029 into 2030. The emissions caps ratchet down pretty aggressively. And this is for large buildings, 25,000 square feet and up, but it's a very meaningful piece of legislation and is already driving a lot of planning and some work around getting buildings into compliance. So the next slide. Just why buildings matter. Quickly, 30% of emissions statewide come directly from buildings. That's not counting the electricity used in them, but would raise the percentage higher. And 67% of city emissions come from buildings. Next slide. So we got to get at buildings if we're going to solve the climate issue. And the formula looks pretty simple. It's do efficiency first. Drive down your demand as much as you can. Then you electrify your building heating and cooling and hot water heating, space heating. But that then needs to come from a decarbonized electric grid to be totally clean. And like I said, we have that law. The CLCPA requires a 100% clean grid by 2040. And then it's important to have load flexibility so that we can help manage the impact on the grid and keep that as modest as we can. But the grid is going to need to support more electricity as we electrify buildings and transportation. Next slide. So just quickly, some of the policy. Oh, this just tells you how big the goal is here. It's if you add up all those gray numbers, which are the units we need to electrify, you get to about 6.75 million housing units. And that's not even getting into the commercial buildings. So huge task ahead. Next slide. And here's how we're helping to drive that. We passed a law this year at the state level that requires all new construction to be emissions free with a start date of January 1, 2026 for single family residential and low rise buildings, and 3 years later, 2029 for larger buildings. New York City has already passed a very similar emissions free new construction law, and theirs kicks in even sooner for low rise buildings 2024, right around the corner, and for larger buildings 2027. Within the scoping plan, there are some other proposed mandates that will still need to be passed through the legislature. The most important one of those is a phase out of fossil heating appliances after a date certain, probably it's suggested to be 2030 for low rise, 2035 for larger buildings. And that means that when your heating system reaches the end of its useful life, after that date, you won't be able to replace it with a fossil heating system. You'll have to electrify at that point. There are a bunch of other drivers. There's a building performance standard for efficiency that would kick in 2030, building labeling benchmarking law that actually underpins being able to roll out a successful building performance standard program like New York City already has. And there's a lot of interest and discussion going on a cap and invest program, which at the state level, which would raise a lot of funds for investing in the clean energy transition by putting a cap on the emissions from the top end of the fossil fuel supply chain. There's one other thing I'll mention really quickly, which I think is really interesting, which is financial institution regulations. So our state Department of Financial Services has issued some proposed guidance on climate risks to all of the banks that it regulates. Next slide. And what it does is it says that if you financial institution don't understand your climate risks and weigh them and figure out how you're going to solve them, then it can have a materially negative impact on the value of your collateral, of your portfolio of collateral. And it goes into what the types of risks are. It's not just the physical risks of you might be in a flood zone or have hurricanes or wildfires, but it also talks about the transition risks of if everybody else has done it and your building is still sitting there and hasn't met the climate requirements, then again, your portfolio value can be compromised. So I'm going to stop there and turn it over to Luis to take it home.
Hey, thanks so much, Greg, and pretty much everybody that's come before me today. I think we can go to the next slide, please. This is a very exciting opportunity. For the first time, there is a low-hanging fruits type of vehicle to collaborate with the federal government in doing something that actually will make a dent in the fight against climate change. So for those who don't live in New York, or those who live in New York but have been under a rock for the last 10 years, there are some acronyms that we use and we use often. The first few ones have been explained, but probably the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act might be one that some of you may not be familiar with. So that was just explained by Greg, but we are gonna go over what went into creating our State Energy Financing Fund. We can go to the next one, please. So when Hans and Elizabeth were presenting, they make reference to these points. They made reference to the authority derived from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law that basically allows the Loan Programs Office waive the innovation requirement as long as there is meaningful state energy financing institution support for those applying to the 1703 Loan Guarantee Program. By providing this type of support, both the LPO and the state of New York are looking to support those that are looking for debt to support the deployment of technologies that may have been already commercialized. And this is an important distinction, right? Because we're not talking about, state-of-the-art innovation. However, we're talking still about innovative technologies that are needed to really, truly, decarbonize the different sectors. Greg just now, he went over, a very quick overview of the different policies and the different programs that the state of New York and New York City specifically have been implementing in the past several years. And one of the key elements in there was the 6 million homes that need to be electrified. And also, he made reference to, a very simple formula that we need to follow. So if you think about it, what we need to do is to make it better, that is, energy efficiency. Then we need to make sure that we can electrify. So we have the infrastructure that is necessary also to electrify the 6 million homes and also industrial and commercial buildings that we have around. Then we need to look downstream and upstream. That is, we need to look at the grid, and then we need to be flexible. So the LPO CEFI program is expected to enable, state energy financing institutions to really, do this. We go to the next slide, please. So the LPO is looking at a large number of technologies, but because of the policies and the focus that we have in New York State, we're looking at a subset of these. We're looking at renewable energy systems. We're looking at, district thermal energy. I'm not going to read all of these, but we are basically looking at all of those technologies that can actually make an impact and help us advance the decarbonization, mostly of the built environment. However, we are looking at technologies that will help us advance the decarbonization of every single sector in the economy in New York. But our point is very specific. If you go to the program opportunity notice 5456 page at NYSERDA, which you can just very simply Google, you will see what are the eligible technologies that will, as I mentioned, are a subset of those allowed by the LPO. We go to the next one, please. So we decided, Hans was talking about, option A and option B, how you can do this. You can, offer support to an entity and then together apply to the LPO, or you can actually create a fund or a way of dispersing funds to support the application of an entity to LPO. So what we decided to do was to create a program which we call the State Energy Financing Fund that has an initial capitalization of $20 million for entities offering affordable financing solutions for the decarbonization of New York State. This program started, in September 11, and we are going to continue receiving applications until we exhaust our funds. We are also, looking at, because also Elizabeth mentioned this before, we're looking at, the best possible solutions and the most affordable solutions that will have an impact and will benefit mostly disadvantaged communities. So we cannot look only at that is available in the state, or looking at, or working with entities that are only, focused on New York. We're looking at, every entity that is willing to come to New York, invest in the decarbonization of the state, and we are looking to provide meaningful support so they can be part of the Title 1703. The funding that we expect will be awarded on a rolling basis, and individual awards will not exceed. And this is something that, there was a conversation that particularly John, Joshi, and Greg Hale had with the LPO about, how we can, set this up. And we decided to go for, our participation to not exceed the lesser of $5 million or 3% of an eligible applicant's proposed project portfolio. This is, so we can provide meaningful support, but we can also make sure that this support is given to more than one entity. We can go to the next one, please. One of the key elements, perhaps, when you think about how can we, whether an entity can apply to PON 5456 in support to their application to the LPO. First of all, they need to see that they align to state policies and the different initiatives. And with this, I'm talking about the CLCPA, but I am also talking about the New York State Disadvantaged Community Criteria. This is information that you can find online, but also is available at our PON. So if you look at these and you realize that there is an actual alignment, or you can actually align your proposal to what New York State is looking to do within the next few years, then, by all means, contact us and we can have a conversation about it, and we can make sure that, your assumptions are correct and that you can work with both the LPO and NYSERDA to make this possible. So the process, we're trying to make the process as simple as possible, right? And we're also, taking a page from the LPO and the way they work. If you have already started a process with the LPO, you will realize that, they're very open to have a conversation to help you do this right. And Hans mentioned it at the very beginning of his presentation. The purpose is to be successful together, right? So any application, any state and the federal government, they really were looking to work together and make sure that this can all work. So the first thing that people need to do is to really review the program documentation. You go to the website, you identify everything that is needed, and then you start developing your proposal. You can come to us, we can talk about it, we can make sure that eligibility is there, we can make sure that you are meeting the minimum portfolio requirement, that you are actually targeting disadvantaged communities in the way that New York is expecting you to do. And then, the recommendation would be, once we agree on something and you have already established a conversation with the LPO and you initiated the process, to apply to them, then we can start thinking about the different materials that you need to apply for this. One key issue with NYSERDA's process is that, we cannot do this partially. Whenever you decide to apply, it's because you already had these conversations, because you review eligibility, because you are sure that this can work. And then you sit down one afternoon and submit everything, because we're not gonna, save in the system partial applications. We can go to the next one, please. So, I mentioned, a million times already, what if you are eligible, right? So, and that is a word that is very difficult for me to pronounce, so please bear with me. But to qualifying for SEFI support, it could be in different ways. Your project may benefit from a subordinate portion of the capital stack, or we can offer a loan loss reserve. NYSERDA has been offering loan loss reserve already, in a different program, but now we're looking to provide this also as part of the support that we offer, to those applying to the LPO, which also allows for us to, participate co-lending with the LPO in pari passu or subordinated debt, or providing a financial backstop. The eligible applicant criteria really, and this is also very important, right? It has to be able to support the decarbonization work that is already going on in New York, and they have to be able to commit an important percentage of their portfolio to create an impact in New York State in the target sectors using the allowed technologies. However, and this is where it gets really interesting. And we have, since we launched this in September, we have had several conversations, and people are like at times asking, probably the most common question is like, who should I talk to first? Should I talk to NYSERDA? Should I talk to the LPO? And the answer is both. You should talk to both of us. You should be talking to both of us, because in the case of NYSERDA, our approval is really dependent on going through the LPO process and having a favorable result, at the end of the level 2 application. We can go to the next one, please. So it is really important that you think about this in parallel, right? So if you are applying to this, you are expected to have successfully participated in the pre-application process for sure, and that you have had a review of your application at level 1, and then in that moment you can apply. You can either have already completed level 1 process, or you could be already participating in level 2. We have had already interest from different organizations that are in different stages and different level of conversation with the LPO. But as I mentioned before, right, the final review and approval will be always subject to to having met all the requirements with the LPO, but also to being approved by NYSERDA scoring committee. And all the information on how this happens and what you need to do for this to happen is in our program opportunity notice that you can find in our website. We can go to the next one, please. I am very conscious that we don't have a lot of time, so just very quickly, I want to say that if you are thinking about if you are an entity that works at the national level and you want to take advantage of this opportunity to invest in New York, you can think of it as a percentage of your portfolio. At least 20% of the applicant's financing facility needs to be in New York, or to meet at least the 20 times leverage capital leverage ratio from NYSERDA's investment to be possible. We go to the next one, please. So there are a number of resources. You can go to the LPO. The LPO has a list of state energy financing institutions. And I understand, given the attendees to this webinar, that we're not only talking to, those that may be thinking of applying to the LPO and NYSERDA's PON 5456. We're also talking to other states that are looking for examples on how to do this. The way this happened really was having constant conversations with LPO, constant conversations with our colleagues, trying to understand how we can best take advantage of this opportunity and considering, what is it that the state of New York is trying to do right now. So the best advice that we can give you is just engage in conversation as much as you want, every question. And, at the end of the day, the process will naturally, give birth to, the best possible option for you to implement this. Go to the next one, please. So finally, there is 2 designated contacts for this in NYSERDA. It's Joshi that is going to join us for a quick Q&A right now, and myself. You can also contact both of us by writing directly to the CEFI fund at NYSERDA.ny.gov. And, we'll be very happy to answer your questions. And with 3 minutes to spare, I think with this, I complete my presentation.
Thank you very, very much, Luis. That was fantastic. And I know there was a lot of information to fit in there. So I think everyone did a great job considering how much information there was that you all wanted to share. It sounds like some folks here are going to be available a little bit past 2 p.m. To answer some of the questions that have been submitted. So if you're an attendee, please feel free to stick around if you'd like to stay for maybe 5 or 6 more minutes. And also, I have a whole list of all of your questions here that I will share with our presenters as well. So we will hopefully be able to get everyone's question answered, even if it isn't right now during the webinar. One quick question I think to start us off is just how much loan authority does LPO have under the sort of CEFI track of the Title 17 program? Hans, I don't know if that would be a good question for you.
Yes, that is a good question for me. The number, is coming down a little bit. I think initially, it was well over 50 billion. The funding is all kind of together. We have our 1706 program, which is energy infrastructure, that was granted 250 billion. And then we have another, significant amount for 1703 projects, of which CEFI is part of. So, we're in no danger of running out of funding tomorrow, but we do anticipate that we will be deploying this funding, and we hope you'll reach out to us very soon.
Great, thank you, Hans. And another question that came in that I think is a good one is when it comes to applying for the to NYSERDA's program, who should a project developer go to first? Should they go to LPO first, or should they go to NYSERDA first, or should they go to both of you at the same time?
As NYSERDA, start with this one.
Well, yeah, I think you should go to both. You should, look at what LPO requires for you to, to take part in this process, and you should also, have a conversation with NYSERDA. There are restrictions in terms of when you can apply, what level of engagement you need to have with the LPO for you to apply to NYSERDA's PON. So, definitely you need to make progress with the LPO. So, strictly speaking, make sure that you have talked to LPO, but, you can approach us also, and we can have a conversation. You cannot apply until you have a level of engagement with the LPO.
All right, you're gonna want to talk to both, so just proceed to both.
Okay, great. And I just want to remind everyone, we got a couple questions in the chat. We always share the recordings of these webinars within 1 to 2 days of the webinar happening. So don't worry about missing out on any of the information that was here. Someone here is wondering if you can elaborate a little bit on the multi-state feature of CEFI funding. Does it mean that a CEFI can fund projects outside of their state working with the same private company, let's say a virtual power plant provider. I know that there had been a slide about sort of having a lead CEFI and several others. So if you could just elaborate on that, that would be fantastic.
I think the short answer to that is yes. And NYSERDA can maybe speak more to an example of how.
Sure, we can do that. But I would like to invite John Joshi to join us. There he is. John, you want to? We cannot hear you.
Oh, you used to be unmuted, I think.
Okay, I don't want to monopolize on the NYSERDA side. Greg, you want to take this one?
Why don't I start, and then as we sort out the audio issues. So absolutely, states that have $20 million worth of a project might be able to combine with other states that have $20 million worth of a project under the portfolio strategy. That's one way of thinking about it. So you can combine a portfolio, and then we just figure out who the applicant is, but you know that portfolio with CEFI support could apply. There are other awards where a company needs CEFI qualification and then could have an award from multiple CEFIs to do projects in multiple states, or even one CEFI to do projects in multiple states. So there's lots of different flavors there, but if you're a small state, there is an opportunity here for you, absolutely, in collaboration with other states. So one from NYSERDA.
From the NYSERDA perspective, I'd say that we're thinking of our investment into a capital stack of a financing facility. And as we said, that financing facility can operate projects outside of New York State as long as you meet the threshold at 20% or 20 times capital leverage. So are we really investing our funds in projects outside of New York State? Not really, because the amount of money that we invest will be, well under the amount of money that will be spent out of the facility in New York State. But it does enable projects across the country. So it's a little bit of nuance to the answer to that question.
And it allows you to attract projects. Yeah. That's the real.
Right.
That one.
Yeah, so just a quick response to that, the ideas we've been thinking about multi-state. It's also to kind of create a standardization approach where we've spoken with some of the mid-Atlantic states, and it could be broader than that. And we've been looking at how you can go downstream, and we saw some examples earlier. How can we get credit unions and CDFIs and have a downstream flow of guarantee and have an aggregation and then have multiple states involved in that? So it's really looking to coalesce that capital with a broader support mechanism and get it more downstream and have a standardization approach that streamlines the underwriting. So that's really the thinking that we're having in some of these ideas, and that could then drive a real efficiency in the market across and bring a lot of actors to the table that traditionally may not have underwritten loans in this space.
Well, thank you all. That was a great answer. It was a question about whether multiple CEFIs could participate, and well, we got multiple panelists to answer it, so that was fantastic. It's my understanding, I got a couple questions about, who is a CEFI right now? It's my understanding that there are lots of potentially state agencies or other organizations within states that would qualify as a CEFI, but that they need to come to you at LPO to sort of flesh that out completely. Is that understanding correct?
That's right. That's right. I mean, we presume most states would have multiple entities that could be CEFIs. How does the state want to use CEFIs to support projects? So come talk to us. That's the real answer. Just come talk to us. But if you're a project company, you could review the landscape of entities in a state: Commerce Department, Economic Development Authority, Green Bank, Energy Center. And you could also ask us, hey, does that look like a CEFI? Or talk to the state government folks.
Right.
Fantastic. And I would say maybe there are two more questions here that I think are really, really worth digging into. The first question is if it's possible for the LPO folks to talk a little bit more in depth about or provide more examples of what kinds of examples of what meaningful support means from a CEFI, and sort of if there are any sort of guardrails around sort of what is and what isn't.
Yes, we were so hoping that we were going to be able to give you actual numbers on this webinar today. We are really, really close to putting out some quantitative examples as well as qualitative factors guidance. Unfortunately, it's not yet gone through the full process to be approved for sharing, but please circle back because I hope to have a better answer to this very soon.
Like, make sure you're on our email list. You know, we'll be able to share it soon, and it'll provide a lot of clarification. But you know, our funding is very highly leveraged.
Yeah, I mean, if I can chime in from New York side, we went through this discussion with LPO, so the way we designed our program offer is reflecting that discussion broadly. So I think that can serve as a little bit of a guidance.
Wonderful. And I think that, oh, was anyone going to add anything there?
I was just saying I agree with John.
Perfect. I think the question that we'll wrap up with, and I want to remind everyone that in the recording, you can see everyone's emails, and then we also shared the emails of the LPO folks in the chat. So certainly, if questions come up for you after, please feel free to send them their way. The question we'll wrap up with is, have there been any examples of CEFIs working with community development financial institutions, CDFIs, to better serve disadvantaged communities?
So that's exactly what we're trying to do with that multi-state effort and or a aggregator model where the aggregator steps in. It's similar to kind of the structure that Elizabeth shared. And the idea there is the aggregation facility comes in, sponsor comes in and works with the community lending entities. We also think there's an opportunity to get CRA funding banks who may be able to come into this cap stack either in the equity position or in other parts of that capital stack. So we think there's an opportunity to create a robust front to back system and make a CEFI enhanced capital at the local level, because a lot of solutions have to be at the local level. And you know, with the criteria for Justice 40, criteria for what we have under CLCPA, we need what we like to coin now called empathetic capital, going all the way down to the local community level. That's really our goal.
Great, thank you, John. And did anyone else want to take a shot at that question, or do they feel like John did a great job?
I think we have, I'm sorry, Elizabeth, please go ahead. I think you were.
I was just going to add, I think that we are also exploring that question in the context of the idea of CDFIs being participants, sort of on the back end. I don't think we've yet gotten far enough along to definitively answer it from the LPO perspective, but we'd love to explore it with you.
And I was going to mention that in New York, you know, NYSERDA has been, you know, designated as a, you know, as a CEFI. And the New York Green Bank is a division of NYSERDA. And as a division of NYSERDA, the New York Green Bank has been working with CDFIs. And right now we have the Community Decarbonization Fund, you know, trying to help CDFIs with concessional capital to, you know, attract also further investment. So this is not happening in coordination with the LPO at this point. However, you know, there are opportunities to enhance this by, you know, leveraging some of the programs that exist at the federal level.
Great. Well, we're already over time, and I don't want to take up any more of anyone's time. But I really want to thank our panelists today, especially for taking the time to, you know, go 10 minutes over to answer some questions. And I just want to reiterate again that you will have their contact information, and that you should not hesitate if you have, you know, some real technical questions that were, you know, we were unable to get to here, to reach out to them and try to get an answer from them. You can also certainly send those questions my way, especially if you are a state person, and we can forward those on to the folks at LPO or NYSERDA, or try to connect you. So my email is right on the screen here, and please don't hesitate to send any questions my way as well. And please also just see here some of the upcoming webinars that CISA has, and you can always visit cisa.org/webinars to both view recordings and also view upcoming webinars. So thank you again to our wonderful panelists, and we hope to see you all, or many of you, at the next CISA webinar. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thanks for the great questions.